Hey, welcome back. Wow, so much going on, and we appreciate Alicia Dennis joining us of People Magazine. Sounds like a very interesting series that they're doing. All right, well, we've visited with this gentleman before. It's a pleasure to have him back on the program. The congressman from the great state of Louisiana, Garrett Graves, is joining us here on the Ringside Hotline. And Congressman, how are you? Good morning.
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. How about you, Jeff?
Very, very good. A happy Friday to you, and so much going on up there in D.C., and want to delve right into it. So, Congressman, you're well known for all of your work on behalf of coastal restoration here for us in the state of Louisiana. Any update on federal funding of these important issues, and we can see some real progress maybe coming up in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And look, this is one of the most frustrating things that I deal with, watching largely the Corps of Engineers' actions and how they've managed the Mississippi River cause the majority of our coastal land loss in Louisiana, approaching 2,000 square miles of land loss, and they're not doing anything about it. They're not being held accountable. Yet, if you or I go impact wetlands, then we're going to, be fined or potentially even put in jail. And so just this disparity is ridiculous. We've been working, and we wrote a bill in 2015 that became law, about $100 million in coastal restoration funding. We've got the offshore energy revenue sharing dollars flowing now. We've got the BP settlement funds flowing now. We're working on legislation right now to improve or increase the sharing of revenue from offshore energy, and all that's important. But if we don't have a better structure on how we're actually going to develop and deliver these projects, then the money is not the real solution. So we passed legislation just this week through the House, 408 votes for it and only 2 votes against it, that begins laying the groundwork for a much more efficient process for how you deliver projects, allowing for the state, local government entities to take the lead on these and not have the Corps in the driver's seat every single time, improving the regulatory process where we can get answers on these projects much faster rather than, as we recently heard, $1 billion project in Louisiana. The federal government said it was going to take them 6 years to finish the permitting process. We don't have that kind of time. So we're making some real progress, and I think we're in a great spot.
So congratulations. That's significant. And now this bill goes to the Senate, correct?
It does. The Senate has started doing some work on their companion bill. They actually passed that out of committee. They're going to be working on it before the full Senate. Coming up, we're working with Senators Cassidy and Kennedy to make sure that we have a really good complementary bill come out of the Senate, because I think the House bill has a lot of good wins in there for Louisiana. So that's the trajectory. Senate should be taking it up sometime within the next month.
And let's just hope we get success there as well. I'm sure our senators will be pushing it, right?
Absolutely, they will. We just need to make sure that some of the wins we have in the House bill, that we're not sitting there just playing defense the whole time. We need some good wins out of the Senate bill. So when we go into these House-Senate negotiations, that we can, end up in an even better spot. And I'll tell you, Jeff, there's some real important things in here. Like, I don't know how many people ask the question, why is wetlands restoration and wetlands protection within the Department of Defense, along with aircraft carriers and F-35s and submarines and other things? I want our Secretary of Defense focused on Russia, China, North Korea, Syria, Iran, and the real threats to this country. I don't want them having to think about those things and a wetlands permit. And so, why is this mission within our Department of Defense? And so we have language in there, provisions in there that begins this process of perhaps migrating it over to the Department of Transportation or somewhere where you have more of an infrastructure type agency where this can be important, a priority of the agency and the Secretary.
Department of the Interior. It just seems like something would be better than defense, right? I agree with you. That just doesn't seem to make sense.
No, it doesn't. And I love to ask people the question. I say, what would you tell me if President Trump came to you right now and said, hey, Jeff, I want you to develop a new mission within the federal government where you're going to build levees and protect people from floods and hurricanes, restore the coast, dredge navigation channels. Give me a plan for that and tell me where you'd put it. Well, how many agencies would you think about in the federal government before you'd get to Department of Defense? It's just not a compatible mission, and we need to make this a priority. I think that has the lack of priority within the Department of Defense for this mission, I think, has resulted in wasting money, wasting time.
Right.
Right there, in St. John, St. Charles parishes, they had a project the Corps studied for 42 years before they came up with a recommendation.
That's just ridiculous. Unbelievable.
And it
Yeah.
does. It evokes that laughter, and you sit there and crack up. But then at the same time, you're like, wait a minute, this is actually sad. I mean, this is people's
Yeah.
homes and businesses. It's crazy, and we can't allow that stuff to keep happening.
Right. Now, I know there's a lot of other business going on up there. There's been some discussions about how we're going to move forward with the whole immigration issue and how that's going to be cobbled together. I know there's been a group working on trying to come up with some sort of compromise. Can you fill us in on what the latest is?
Yeah, the president's laid out 4 pillars in an immigration deal that I think are really important. One of them is securing the border, and all these other efforts on enforcing the laws and things like that. I mean, they're irrelevant if we're not actually going to secure the border and distinguish our country from others. Stop allowing folks to just walk in freely. So that's important. That's part of a negotiation we're working on. Number 2 is this visa lottery program where you just accept anybody in here potentially under a lottery without any type of merit-based consideration. Are they going to come in and are they going to pull the wagon, or are they going to come in and ride on the wagon? And I think that's something that's really important. Other countries don't do this. We need to reform that. The other is the chain migration, where if you come in, then your brother and sister and cousin and uncle and aunt and grandparents, there's not an end to that snowball. It just keeps growing. And so looking at reforming that, and then, of course, what's known as DACA, which is the folks that are under 18 that have come here illegally, and I want to reemphasize, come here illegally, finding some type of how to deal with that population, because you've got to recognize that they came here illegally. You got to recognize that they're potentially being given higher priority or preference over those who are trying to legally immigrate to the United States. And so that's been the real sticking point or challenge, is figuring out how to deal with them. A lot of Democrats are saying we need to offer them amnesty. I don't agree with that. You can't reward illegal behavior and incentivize people to come here illegally. But do you throw them out? Do you give them legal status? Do you put them on a path to citizenship? Or do you return them back to their countries and allow them to immigrate legally like other folks?
And then what about the whole issue of the wall? I mean, and getting funding, I think the $25 billion, that was the deal that I had heard that was talked about months ago. We'll give amnesty to the folks who are, quote, dreamers or are part of them, in exchange for $25 billion for the wall, the physical wall. And I know a lot of folks are hoping to see some action on the wall. So do you think we'll see some action there? Will we get some real funding?
Well, that's the real first component I was talking about, securing the border. And obviously a physical structure of walls are a really important part of that overall security in some areas. Like I said, we've got to distinguish our country from others. They had an area in San Diego where they put a wall in, and they had an immediate reduction of like 96%, I think, in illegal immigrants crossing in the area. So look, in some cases, a wall is exactly, or other physical barriers is exactly what works. In other places, increased border surveillance and security, electronic measures, detection measures, all sorts of different technologies need to be deployed, and that's all part of the overall solution. So under a bill that's out there right now, it's H.R. 4760, it does provide funding for border security, including a wall. In fact, overall, it's about $38 billion. And like you said, I think that any deal on DACA, and I do not support amnesty there, but any deal on DACA, or these the kids who came here illegally, folks under 18, you need to make it contingent upon border security, because you think about it, if we're going to say, okay, we're going to give you legal status or a path to citizenship or whatever else, but we're not going to secure the border, I guarantee you the next wave and next wave and next wave of illegal immigrants are going to keep coming here.
And all we have to do is go back to 1986, where we had the deal under President Ronald Reagan, where amnesty was granted in exchange for supposed enhancements to border security that never happened. So the amnesty was given first. The border enhancements never occurred. So it was, I think, one of the big failures of an administration that I think was overall very, very successful, the Reagan administration. So I think it has to be something where we're not promising, if not amnesty or whatever kind of concessions we make to these, quote, dreamers, in exchange for something that never happens on the border. We've been promised border enhancements for decades. In the 2006, I think you had the Secure Fence Act that was passed, and looks like that funding was never secured. So we never really got that promised fencing. So we've been down this road before, Congressman, and this time I'm hoping we actually see something physical going up at the border, which, as you pointed out, is very effective.
It absolutely is, and I agree with you, what you said earlier in regard to the contingency. We've got to have any type of dealing with the DACA folks, offering them legal status or work status or whatever. All that has to be contingent upon securing our border, because otherwise we are not stopping the underlying problem that has gotten us into this predicament. And just like you said, back in under the Reagan administration, the deal was cut and only half the deal was actually honored. And that's why we're in this same predicament now than they were decades ago.
We're visiting with 6th District Congressman, the great state of Louisiana, Congressman Garrett Graves, joining us. Congressman, what is happening with the Farm Bill and potential reform of the food stamp program?
You know, the Farm Bill, which provides programs for our farmers to make sure we have abundant food supplies and safe food and things like that all over the United States. Louisiana, of course, grows many, many crops that are important to the state and nation. But another component of that bill is the food stamp program, otherwise known as SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And what's happened is during the Obama administration, the dollars and number of people in that program nearly tripled. We went from about $17 billion to about $45 billion in funding for that program. And look, people are paying that. That money doesn't grow on trees. Taxpayers are funding the program. And so there were pilot programs that were done in Maine and Kansas, in Alabama and other states where they provided a work requirement. In fact, even dating back to Senator Ted Kennedy and President Clinton, they negotiated and agreed to a work requirement that President Obama ultimately reversed. So we've introduced legislation. There's a version of it in the Farm Bill right now that would reinstall a work requirement based upon some of these successful efforts, where you get people connected with job assistance programs, job training programs, and you get them back into the workforce. We saw success of up to 60% of the people getting integrated back into the workforce. That is the best thing you can do for their health, for their well-being, for their dignity, for their pathway to prosperity. And so I'm really excited about the cost savings, about the fact that you're giving these people a pathway to prosperity, not sticking them, getting them stuck in the cycle of poverty. The bill did not pass the House, but it will. We're waiting on it. It got held up because of a separate immigration fight.
Because of immigration, right?
It did. Yeah. It did. And so we're trying to work on the immigration deal now. We're going to bring the Farm Bill back up. And that provision that's going to help get people back into the workforce and save taxpayer monies, get folks off this poverty cycle, is going to pass the House. And we're just going to have to work through the Senate and see if we can get them to concur in our reforms.
And that's always the challenge, right? The graveyard of good legislation, the Senate. Let's, if we could, squeeze in a quick call or two here. Congressman Garrett Graves with us. Our buddy Adam is checking in from Pearl River. Congressman Garrett Graves is our guest. Adam, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, Jeff, and good morning to the Congressman.
Good morning.
Thank him for being with us this morning. Congressman, I was telling Jeff the other day, I had done a lot of consulting work in my career with the federal government in the areas of organizational management and things of that type. I noticed as a sideline as I was doing my work, particularly up in D.C., whenever there's a study or investigation such as done by the OIGs or GAO, and they prepare their report, there's always this period of review by the people that they have reviewed, whereby all of these, you might say, defenses, usually false defenses, come forward from these various agencies, just trying to destroy all the findings that had come up during these investigations. And I'm just wondering, I've always scratched my head, why do these investigative agencies allow these people that they've investigated to follow up on their reports and basically destroy their reports before the reports are even issued?
And I guess very pertinent comments as we await this IG report coming from the Department of Justice.
Exactly.
So, Adam, appreciate you, sir. Let's get the Congressman's take on that. Congressman?
Yeah, Adam, thanks. And you certainly bring up a good point. I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this whole, deep state or protectionist thing, it dynamics or components of that are real, and that there are thousands and thousands of people within the federal government that have jobs that made sense in the 1950s and 60s, but today are no longer relevant or no longer priorities and don't represent modern times. And so sometimes when you have these findings, these recommendations for cutting programs or people or dollars, you have this internal status quo resistance that's there. I do think that giving people feedback or the ability to share an alternative perspective, and in some cases these are the experts. So I think giving them the ability to share thoughts is fine, but not to come in and whitewash or sanitize something that could actually result in really good government modernization, government reform, or in some cases, as we've seen with President Trump, just absolute disruption or transformation. A perfect example. When you had the VA hospital debacle in Arizona, not a single person was fired, disciplined.
Pitiful.
Nothing. Yet we came in, new Trump administration came in, we start, providing more flexibility. We've had over 1,200 VA employees held accountable, fired because they weren't providing the services that they needed. And so you've got to have that type of real transformation, and you've got to have the fresh perspective. That come in because there is an internal resistance or protectionist thoughts within or efforts within the federal government and much of the federal workforce. But we've got to look at things differently, think about things differently, and prepare the government for 2030, not the government for 1930.
Yeah, well said. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. Hopefully we can do this on a regular basis, and keep up the good work up there for the people of Louisiana.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Adam, y'all have a good weekend.
Yes, you too. And Congressman Garrett Graves with us, and very good discussion on a lot of incredibly important issues for all of us here in Louisiana. We'll take a brief time out, take care of some business, get a news update. Busy 10 o'clock hour coming your way. Hang on. We'll be back.